Have you ever wondered why breathing is slowly starting to feel harder and why the effects of climate change never seem to hit everyone the same way?
Or how the small lifestyle choices we make every day quietly shape the environment around us?
Well then, you're in the right place. This is Earthwise,
Or otherwise.
a weekly climate news roundup brought to you by Climate Action Live in collaboration with the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication.
Every week, we bring you climate stories from around the world, along with people's voices, cultural reflections, and small actions that we can all take in our everyday lives.
On this journey, I'm Ritvik.
And I'm Gayatri. Two perspectives, but one shared concern: the planet we call our home.
This is Earthwise or otherwise.
Because the real question isn't just what being Earthwise looks like.
It is also what the cost of choosing otherwise might just be. So now let's begin with our weekly National Climate Check-in, where we break down what's happening across India.
From policy shifts to ground level impact, here's everything you need to know about the country's changing climate story.
So Gayatri, when people hear the words clean energy, they usually imagine solar panels, windmills, and electric vehicles. But there is another form of energy that governments around the world continue debating heavily. That is the nuclear energy. Supporters believe that it can help reduce carbon emissions, while critics warn that environmental and safety risks still remain deeply concerning. According to a Reuters report published on 11th of May, the Indian government is considering reducing mandatory safety buffer zones around nuclear reactors in order to free up land for future nuclear expansion projects. Officials believe that this could help India increase energy production faster while supporting the country's transition away from fossil fuels. India is currently under growing pressure to meet rising electricity demands while also reducing carbon emissions. As industries expand, cities grow, and technology becomes increasingly dependent on electricity. The country requires enormous amounts of energy every single day. Renewable sources like solar and wind energy are growing rapidly, but they also depend on weather conditions and storage systems. Nuclear energy, on the other hand, is often promoted as a stable, low-carbon energy source capable of producing electricity continuously. However, environmental experts and policy analysts have raised serious concerns regarding the proposal to reduce safety zones around reactors. These buffer zones exist to protect nearby population and ecosystems in cases of emergency, radiation leaks, or industrial accidents. Reducing them could potentially bring residential communities and agricultural regions closer to high-risk industrial areas. The discussion also raises larger questions about the future of climate solutions. Can countries transition towards cleaner energy while still ensuring environmental safety and public trust? And how do governments balance economic growth with long-term ecological responsibility? What makes this issue especially complex is that climate change itself is pushing countries towards difficult choices. Nations are trying to reduce fossil fuel dependence quickly, but the energy source comes with its own environmental, financial, and even social consequences. Gayatri, I also think that experts further believe that transparency, scientific assessment, and public consultation will be extremely important before major policy changes are implemented, because energy transitions affect not only the environment but also public safety, livelihoods, and long-term national development. Climate action is no longer about replacing one energy source with another. It is about building systems that remain sustainable, accountable, and safe for future generations. The call to action for this is, Gayatri, that we must stay informed about how energy policies influence both climate goals and environmental safety. We must encourage discussions around sustainable development that balance technological progress with ecological responsibility. We should support clean energy initiatives while also demanding transparency, scientific accountability, and public awareness in large-scale infrastructural decisions. Real environmental progress depends not only on reducing emissions but also on ensuring that solutions remain safe, ethical, and sustainable for the society as a whole at the end of the day.
Ritvik, when people think about environmental destruction, they often imagine large forests being cut down or rivers becoming polluted. But honestly, sometimes ecological damage begins in places many people barely notice. Like, rocky plateaus, fragile ecosystems, and landscapes that may appear empty at first glance. Well, according to a recent report published by the Times of India, scientists have warned that mining and quarrying activities are increasingly threatening the rocky plateaus of the Western Ghats, one of India's most ecologically sensitive regions. The Western Ghats are globally recognized as a biodiversity hotspot, home to countless species of plants, insects, reptiles, birds, amphibians found nowhere else in the world. Ritvik, researchers explained that many rocky plateaus in the region are wrongly classified as wastelands despite supporting highly specialized ecosystems adapted to harsh seasonal conditions. Now, growing demand for minerals required in renewable energies, technologies, and industrial expansion is increasing pressures on these fragile landscapes. Mining activities involving blasting, excavation, land clearing, and heavy industrial movement, all of which can permanently alter ecosystems that took thousands of years to develop. What makes this situation especially concerning is that many species living in these habitats are extremely sensitive to environmental change. Even slight disturbances in soil composition, water retention, or temperature can affect their survival. Scientists also warn that climate change may intensify the crisis further. Rising temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, and habitat fragmentation together creates a dangerous combination for biodiversity. And this reveals an important contradiction in the global climate conversation. Many countries are aggressively pursuing green energy transitions to reduce fossil fuel dependence. But renewable technologies themselves require minerals like lithium, cobalt, and rare earth materials, leading to increased mining across environmentally vulnerable regions around the world. So, the challenges become more larger than simply switching from just fossil fuels to renewable energy. The real change is ensuring that climate solutions themselves do not create new ecological damage. Environmental experts believe that sustainable mining regulations, stronger ecological assessments, and conservation-focused plannings are urgently needed to prevent irreversible biodiversity loss. Because once fragile ecosystems disappear, restorations become extremely difficult. Well, sometimes they may become impossible. The call to action to this is pay closer attention to local ecosystems and understand that even seemingly small landscapes can hold enormous ecological importance. Support environmental conservation efforts and encourage responsible industrial practices that minimize ecological damage. Become more aware of how climate solutions and resource extraction are interconnected in today's world. Sustainable development should protect biodiversity alongside the economic growth, because environmental protection is not only about preserving forests, it's about safeguarding an entire ecosystem before they disappear permanently.
Gayatri, don't you think cities around the world are facing an enormous challenge? What should be done with the mountains of waste generated every single day? Landfills continue expanding, pollution levels are rising, and governments are under increasing pressure to find faster waste management solutions. One method, often promoted as a modern solution, is to waste energy technology systems, where garbage is burned to generate electricity while reducing the amounts of waste sent to landfills. But according to a recent explainer released by Sahas in collaboration with Climate Action Live, experts are warning that waste-to-energy plants may not be environmentally friendly as they appear. While these plants are presented as clean energy systems, researchers explain that burning mixed wastes releases dangerous emissions, including dioxins, toxic gases, and heavy metals that can severely affect air quality and public health. Communities living near such facilities often face concerns regarding foul smelling emissions, respiratory illnesses, and even long term environmental exposure. Experts also pointed out another major issue, that is cost. Waste to energy plants are extremely expensive to build and operate, especially when compared to renewable energy sources like solar and wind power. In many cases, municipalities spend enormous amounts transporting waste across long distances simply to keep these plants functioning efficiently. And this reveals a larger problem within the waste management systems in the urban India. Many cities continue treating waste only after it has been already accumulated, rather than addressing the root issue of this excessive waste generation. Environmental experts argue that more sustainable solutions include waste segregation at source, composting organic waste, recycling materials, reducing plastic consumption, and improving local community level waste systems are the main thing here. Does it not seem very valid, Gayatri, to you? What makes this debate especially important is that climate solutions themselves must also contribute to environment responsibly. Sometimes technologies are marketed as green solutions, but they can still create hidden environmental and social costs if they are implemented without long-term proper planning. The discussion around waste to energy plants also highlights how modern environmental challenges are becoming increasingly interconnected. Waste management, public health, energy production, pollution, urban planning, and climate change are no longer separate issues. They influence one another constantly. And unless cities build systems focused on sustainability rather than short term fixes, environmental problems may continue shifting from one to another. The call to action for this is become more conscious about the waste generated in everyday life and support responsible waste segregation and recycling practices within your communities. Encourage sustainable waste management policies that prioritize reduction, reuse, and environmental safety over temporary solutions. We must stay informed about how urban systems impact public health and environmental sustainability. Cleaner cities cannot be created through technology alone. They require awareness, responsible habits, and long-term collective action from the society as a whole.
Movies, music, fashion, social media trends, we consume all of it every day. But have you ever paused to think about the environmental footprint behind these choices?
Well, let's bring this conversation down to the ground with our Vox Pop segment.
To explore these questions further, our climate crew has been out and about speaking directly to people on campus.
Pratha, Nayak, and Samagra Thakur have been engaging with students, young audiences, and everyday listeners,
trying to understand how pop culture choices quietly shape the way we think about climate.
So, over to you both.
Do you trust the government to stick by its climate promises and the fact that they'll take steps to improve the situation or not?
Personally, I do believe that it will eventually boil down to individuals like us to combat climate change, because the government makes certain promises, but there's always such a big gap between these promises and action that is supposed to be taken. So I don't think we can fully depend on the government to solve climate change. Individuals can play a big role in this over time through the choices that we make and the way we live.
I feel like humans as sort of like a species tend to ignore problems until they immediately affect them. And I feel like promises, therefore, that are made on climate change are just ways sort of to try to bring attention back to the subject, but also they're made with the understanding that most of the population will not demand for a follow through on those things until there is an immediate effect. And so I think within the worldview as well that most people adopt, climate change just ceases to be a problem for most of the population, which is also what I think causes a lot of governments to not care about it. There is an exploitatory sort of nature to it. I mean, I don't think that the government will stick by its promises. and it will have to come down to individual citizens. But I don't think I could blame entirely the government for it, because there isn't enough pushback from the population about these promises in particular.
I would say that there is far greater limitation when it comes to individual action compared to trusting government implementation. Though an individual puts in the effort, their impact is rather minuscule compared to what the government can actually achieve. You can look at it the skepticism when it comes to the government and their action, but they are the ones driving these policies and climate targets. In most countries, I would assume, it is the people themselves voting upon these promises and hoping the higher authority can do it right, with the government dictating what businesses, private equities, and us as individuals do. I don't think an individual can hold such power and jurisdiction when it comes to combating climate change as a problem.
Well, now let's take a look at what's happening around the world in climate action.
From global policies to on-ground impact, here's your weekly international climate roundup. You know, Ritvik, wildfires were once considered seasonal disasters affecting only certain regions of the world. But today, they are becoming larger, more unpredictable, and far more dangerous than before. According to a Reuters report, scientists have warned that global wildfire outbreaks have reached record highs this year due to extreme heat, prolonged droughts, and worsening climate conditions linked to rising global temperatures. Reports suggest that more than 150 million hectares of land have already been burnt down worldwide during the first few months of 2026. Regions across Africa, Asia, and parts of America have experienced unusually intense fire activities, destroying forests, wildlife habitats, agricultural lands, and residential communities. Scientists say the climate change is playing a major role in intensifying wildfire conditions. Higher temperatures dry out vegetation more quickly, while prolonged heat waves and reduced rainfalls create highly flammable environments. Once fires begin under such conditions, they spread faster and become increasingly difficult to control. But the consequences of wildfires extend far beyond burning forests. Wildfires release enormous amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, further accelerating global warming. Smoke from fires can travel across countries and continents, severely affecting air quality and public health even in regions located far from the actual fire zones. Hospitals often witness increased respiratory illness during severe wildfire seasons, while local economies suffer through damaged infrastructure, tourism loss, agricultural destruction, and long-term ecological disruption. What's especially alarming to me here, Ritvik, is that scientists now believe wildfire seasons are becoming longer in many parts of the world. Areas once considered relatively safe are beginning to face increasing fire risks due to climate change patterns. This reveals how climate change is no longer only creating isolated disasters. It is de-establishing environmental systems globally. Experts warn that unless greenhouse gas emissions are reduced significantly and environmental protections are strengthened, extreme fire events may continue becoming more severe in the coming decades. And once ecosystems repeatedly experience large-scale fires, recovery becomes slower and biodiversity losses become harder to reverse. The call to action to this is recognize that climate disasters happening across the world are interconnected warnings about the future of our planet. Support environmental policies and sustainable practices that help reduce carbon emissions and protect environment ecosystems. Stay informed about climate science and encourage conversations around long-term environmental responsibility instead of merely treating disasters as temporary events. Climate resilience begins with awareness, but meaningful changes require consistent action from governments, industries, and individuals alike.
Gayatri, when we think about climate change, industries like transport, fuel, and electricity usually dominate the conversation. But one of the world's largest hidden contributors to carbon emissions is something that people rarely question. It is the buildings around us. According to a report published by Climate Action Live, researchers and sustainability experts are now promoting eco-friendly construction bricks as a cleaner alternative to traditional fired clay bricks, which are responsible for large-scale carbon emissions. Okay, so let's set the scene. Traditional brick making involves burning clay at extremely high temperatures using coal and other fossil fuels. This process releases massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere while also damaging fertile agricultural soil that takes years to regenerate. Now, new alternatives such as compressed stabilized earth blocks, fly ash bricks, AAC blocks, and bio bricks are being developed to reduce environmental harm while also lowering construction costs. What makes these materials especially important is that many are created using industrial waste, recycled materials, crop residue, or locally available resources. Some are newer technologies, and they can even trap carbon dioxide inside the bricks themselves, turning construction materials into part of the climate solution. Experts say that these sustainable blocks also improve thermal insulation, helping buildings remain cooler during extreme heat conditions. This reduces dependence on air conditioning and lowers the long-term energy consumption. And this becomes increasingly important as cities continue expanding rapidly across the world. Urbanization is growing at an enormous pace, especially in developing countries. Millions of new homes, offices, roads, and buildings are being constructed every year. If sustainable construction methods are ignored, the environmental impact of urban growth could become extremely severe. At the same time, environmentalists warn that climate action cannot focus only on energy production while ignoring construction and infrastructure studies. Because every stage of development, from material and transportation to waste management and urban planning, affects the environment. What this shift towards eco-friendly bricks truly reflects is the large transformation of how societies are beginning to think about sustainability. Climate solutions are no longer limited to large government policies alone. Even everyday materials used in homes and cities are now becoming part of the environmental conversation. And experts believe that these small technological changes, when adopted widely, can create significant long-term environmental impact. The call to action for this, Gayatri, is that we should become more aware of how construction and urban development affect climate beyond what is immediately visible. Support and sustainability infrastructure practices must be incorporated throughout our lives. Climate responsibility should be integrated into every aspect of development, including new homes, buildings, and cities being designed. Protecting the environment requires innovation, awareness, and long-term thinking, which is both in industry practices and everyday life. Fascinating, isn't it?
Ritvik, sports are usually associated with excitement, celebration, and global unity. But today, even international sporting events are beginning to reveal the growing impact of climate change. According to a Reuters report, a recent scientific study has warned that extreme heat may impose serious health risks during the 2026 FIFA World Cup. Researchers found that nearly 1/4 of the tournament's matches could experience temperatures exceeding recommended safety limits for athletes and spectators. Scientists explained that climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of heat waves across many parts of the world, including regions expected to host World Cup matches. High temperatures create serious physical risks for players. Extreme heat can lead to dehydration, exhaustion, heat stroke, reduced physical performance, and dangerous stress on the human body. Spectators, stadium workers, medical teams, and local communities are also affected when large public gatherings take place under intense heat conditions. Experts have recommended stronger cooling systems, additional hydration breaks, schedule changes, and improved emergency medical planning to reduce health risks during matches. Beyond sports, this study reflects much larger environmental reality. Climate change is beginning to affect systems and experiences once considered unrelated to the environmental issues, from tourism and labor productivity to education, transportation, and public health. Heat waves are now becoming one of the deadliest climate-related threats globally. Unlike floods or storms, extreme heat often develops silently, yet it can place enormous strain on healthcare systems, economies, and urban infrastructure. Scientists warn that without stronger climate action, dangerous heat conditions may become increasingly common during outdoor activities, public events, and daily life itself. And as temperatures continue rising worldwide, societies may be forced to rethink how cities, workplaces, sporting events, and public spaces are designed in the future. Because climate change is no longer a distant environmental issue, it is gradually reshaping how people live, work, travel, and interact globally. Well, the call to action to this is: take rising temperatures and heat-related warnings seriously instead of treating them as temporary discomforts. Support sustainable practices and climate-conscious policies that help reduce global warming and protect public health. Encourage awareness about how climate change affects everyday life, including sports, workplaces, and community spaces. Building a safer future requires collective responsibility, informed action, and long-term commitment towards environmental sustainability before climate risks become more difficult to manage.
Today, we did not just look at climate as a crisis, but rather as a series of choices. Choices we see in the news, in boardrooms, in government files, and in our own kitchens.
And with every choice, we pick a direction, either walking with the planet or choosing to ignore it.
This conversation is made possible by Climate Action Live, a youth-driven platform by Madhur Singh that takes climate awareness beyond conversations and connects it to real-world action.
At its core, Climate Action Live creates space for young voices where learning, dialogue, and action all come together.
If you want to be a part of this movement, then do visit the Climate Action Live website and explore how you can contribute.
You can also check out the New Imaginations Research Center at the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication, which works with young scholars to expand stories and perspectives, helping us understand climate and society through new narratives.
So, until next week when we meet again,
Keep asking yourself, are you choosing to be Earthwise
or otherwise?